Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your patience. It wouldn't be an Occupy stream without being a few minutes behind schedule, but I'm finally able to get everything to work here, and we are excited to bring you some ideas for how to play 11 games worth of NFL DFS. Today we have two main slates here on DraftKings and FanDuel. There is a early slate kicking off here at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with 6 games on it, with $10,000 to first place in the big GPP contest that DraftKings has. And then tonight we have a $20,000 to first place contest as well on the line on a 5-game slate. So I do want to attack this like I am doing one of our pre-recorded videos on the channel. So I'll try to spend about 10 to 12 minutes going through top plays for both classic slates here, and then I will stop and answer any questions you guys have in the chat along the way. There is a preview article on our website actually for the early slate. I actually made it completely free. We were going to have that as notes for our Discord subscribers, but we have so many notes for all 12 teams today that we just had to bust out some page views and some SEO for the brand here, and I'm sure Brian and Moose are happy to see that here. First things first, though, before I dive into anything else here, there's going to be a couple things I want to do actually. We have a lot of great content that we're putting out this year, thanks to DraftKings on Best Ball. And I'd encourage you to check out our Best Ball playlist here on the Occupy Fantasy YouTube channel. Chuck and myself, Chuck, you probably saw him last weekend do a couple of the videos. We have put together this playlist here. I'll put it on the screen. We right now have 6 videos on the channel about best ball strategy here for DraftKings contests, and you can definitely apply that strategy to contests on other sites. And we have 3 more videos coming next week for August best ball week here as well. So keep an eye out for our schedule of live shows and recorded shows that are going to be uploaded to the channel for best ball. If that's your thing, you're probably winning some tickets to Best Ball Millionaire here on DraftKings if you're following our advice for preseason DFS. So we do have some content here to help you win in best ball as well. The other thing that I wanted to go over with you guys here is that we have 2 more slates this weekend, right? We have a Sunday slate tomorrow. We have a Monday Night Football game as well. So keep an eye on the channel for all of our videos that we'll be posting for the rest of the week. And then finally, I couldn't get here today to give you some of the analysis and the advice that we have without our phenomenal team that we have working for us behind the scenes. And I'm talking about Brian Jester, of course, who's on vacation. Shout out Brian, wherever island you're on in Europe. I hope you're enjoying yourself. Moose, who does all of the back-end data work for us. And then our really extremely talented team of researchers and writers for NFL Preseason. That's going to be Lucas Jensen, Chuck Silver, Brandon Smith, especially. Those 3 have been helping us extensively. Thank you to all of you guys. And congratulations to Brandon, who actually won the main GPP last Sunday for $10,000 on DraftKings, and we posted that in our Discord as well. And that is a big reason why you should be paying attention to what we have to offer you here at Occupy Fantasy for NFL DFS. Getting into the plays here today, Tanner McKee is probably the best quarterback that's actually going to play at least a half of football today, if not more. And when we look at some of our notes that we put together for this slate on the Eagles, again, completely free link on our website. Let me dump that into the chat for you guys. McKee is going to be basically expected to play more than half the snaps today. I understand that he's not starting the game, but he's probably going to play the majority of the game. And we have wide receivers for the Eagles that are going to play well over half of the amount of snaps that are available. Johnny Wilson and Darius Cooper each played over 2/3 of the snaps last week. And historically, Nick Sirianni keeps that rotation the same in the Eagles pass catcher room here. So we're expecting those 2 guys to play again pretty heavily. McKee and these 2 Eagles receivers are our favorite plays for low risk contests today for that reason. At running back, we saw him explode onto the scene last week a little bit. Ollie Gordon as the final running back in Miami's rotation. And now that Alexander Mattison is unfortunately going to be out with a neck injury for the remainder of the season, he's probably going to play a big role for the next 2 preseason weeks, but might actually be in the mix for meaningful touches in the regular season as well as the 3rd running back on the depth chart. We're expecting Gordon to get the most action today for the Dolphins, and Jalen Wright, the RB2, the presumptive backup to Devin Achane, to get the 2nd most work. They're both really strong plays, but Gordon probably the most popular running back you can consider for your lineups this afternoon. Sal Cannella Shout out to my UFL spring football fans. Let's take a look at how Cleveland used Canella last week. Canella ran 20 routes for the Browns in their game last week, and he had 4 targets, targeted pretty closely to the same rate as the wide receivers everybody wants to play today from Cleveland: Cade McDonald, Gage Larvadain, and Caden Davis, but playing at a really weak position today, I would say, for expected playing time. Canelo is probably going to have the highest upside for time on the field, and therefore may have the highest ceiling outcome today, but may not necessarily have a very high floor either. There are a lot of names, of course, available at the tight end position that people know and love that they're going to want to play. They just don't have tremendous playing time upside. Brock Bowers will play with the Raiders starters sparingly today. David Njoku's probably not going to play at all. George Kittle's going to play sparingly with the 49ers starters today. Those are some guys that I think the field might click on just because they know their names. Others that we are interested in based off of our research, a pair of tight ends from the Eagles, again, sticking with the Eagles in low-risk contests. Kylan Granson, the former Colt, and E.J. Jenkins led this team in opportunities last week at the tight end position, and that makes them really strong plays here. Going back to our Eagles analysis, they played 30% of the snaps, which isn't a ton. I understand that, but they each had 3 targets last week, and 3 plus targets might actually be enough to be optimal at tight end today on this slate. So going to be interested in pairing either one of those guys with Tanner McKee here today. All right, let me check in on the questions because those are basically the top plays that we have for this slate in order. I can go through some high-risk plays. I can go through some other things in our plug article that's listed on the website that I just posted in the chat here. Okay. So we got a report saying it'll be DTR and McCord from Jeff McClain. This is why we do our research right up until the last minute, and things change last minute here at the quarterback position, at all positions in NFL DFS on this slate. Let's look at our rankings overall. I'm going to check with our team and see if I have any notes about the Eagles from the staff. Nothing just yet here on that. We were monitoring the usage for Cleveland, and I did take Dillon Gabriel out of our rankings initially because we thought there was a risk that he wasn't going to play at all with just him and Tyler Huntley available. When we look at how Cleveland was covering the lead up to this week's game, there was a lot of speculation, primarily from Mary Kay Cabot, who is the one of the longest tenured Cleveland Browns beat writers, that Gabriel might get the start today because of this hamstring injury he's been dealing with, but then have limited playing time. So I think we are actually looking at a situation where Tyler Huntley probably plays the majority of this game. So if you're looking for an immediate pivot off of Tanner McKee, if the reporting from Philadelphia is McKee won't be playing today at all, then obviously we need one. I do think Tyler Huntley is the best play that we can consider now on this slate. Did get confirmation once again from national reporters that Dillon Gabriel is going to start today. Questionable to see what that upside is going to look like. I don't think it's going to be the same rope or same length of playing time that Shedeur Sanders had last week for Dillon Gabriel. We know once Huntley comes in, he's probably going to play the entire game. But if we look at some of the other higher ranked plays on the early slate for today, primarily looking at like stat lines on places like Pick Six, Prize Picks, Underdog Fantasy, get a good sense for what's going to be popular today. Aiden O'Connell has a projection of just under 100 passing yards, so he's probably going to be pretty popular, not just on this slate, but on that 4 p.m. showdown slate as a quarterback play that you can consider. Sam Howell with the Minnesota Vikings has a 97.5-yard projection on Underdog anyway, so he'll probably be popular for Minnesota. And then we do think that Zach Wilson, out of the 2 Miami quarterbacks, him and Quinn Ewers, is going to be the more popular of the 2 there, especially after Ewers looked pretty poor in last week's outing for Miami. Higher risk plays that should play a little bit. The field's probably going to be interested in Malik Willis just because he has some rushing upside. And then very similarly, Hendon Hooker with the Detroit Lions. All of these guys that I just brought up are probably going to play a half of football. The idea behind being interested in Huntley over these guys is that he might have upside for more than that, right? So that's why we're looking at that. There was one more I wanted to cover. I do apologize. Riley Leonard with the Colts. If we see similar usage in the first half from the Colts today with Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson, They'll probably be done by halftime, regardless of how they divide that up. And Riley Leonard, once again, will look like he'll be in a spot to play the entire second half for the Colts. So that's a pool of quarterbacks that we are looking at on the early-only slate today. Other than Ollie Gordon, extremely thin running back room for the San Francisco 49ers. And main San Francisco 49er beats Matt Maiocco and others out there in the Bay Area think that Corey Kiner is actually going to be in line for a lot of work today. And that's what we have listed here in our notes. Let's go pull the article up by Matt Maiocco. 5 49ers to keep an eye on today in the game between the 49ers and the Raiders. Kiner, someone the staff is very high on, and they do think that he will have a ton of ability to play today. A lot of game action expected against the Raiders, and he's actually competing for the number 3 running back job on the main roster. So they're probably looking to get a longer look at him, especially given all the injuries that they're experiencing right now. Isaac Guerrero, Jordan James, just a couple of running backs that are not expected to play for San Francisco. Here, we also have Will Shipley with Philadelphia. Has a decently high projection anyway, so I do think he might be a little popular today. I don't know if I would trust that in low-risk contests, but might be a good high-risk play with Philadelphia having one of the higher implied team totals today. We have 2 running backs that I'm most interested in from the New England Patriots for high-risk contests today. Ramondre Stevenson and Terrell Jennings did not practice on Thursday. So we're not interested in them because we're not expecting them to play. We're going to have to monitor warm-ups there. Lan Larson, you see he's on injured reserve, actually has some stat lines out there, at least on one site that I looked at. He's not going to play. Travion Henderson is locked in as a starter on this offense. So if he plays, he's only going to play a few snaps. That leaves 3 guys that are on the active roster. Deneric Prince was cut, so he's not an option. That might actually have a decent amount of playing time upside today. That's going to be Antonio Gibson, who's listed as the 3rd running back on the depth chart and is a veteran NFL player. I don't know if Mike Vrabel needs to take a look at him. We have JaMychal Hasty, who's more of a special teamer, was also on this team last year. And we have Shane Watts, a rookie undrafted free agent who was just signed this week. This is your prototypical preseason player that gets a ton of burn, basically to get through the game and not risk a real valuable asset on the roster. So in high-risk contests today, I like Shane Watts a lot because I basically think there's only 3 running backs that are really going to be competing for touches for the vast majority of this game, like 90% or more of the snaps. That's going to be Watts, Antonio Gibson, and JaMychal Hasty, because I think Henderson probably plays a series or 2 at the most. And I'm very skeptical that Mike Vrabel would want to take a look at Antonio Gibson. When we look at how Mike Vrabel treated his running backs for the Titans when he was head coach there for 5-6 years, he typically gave the RB4 on the depth chart the vast majority of the work in preseason in week 1 and in week 2. Last week, obviously that was Larson and Jennings, and we're not expecting either of them to play today. Gibson played the 3rd most snaps, so I think he probably stays in the same role, and that's why we're looking at these 2 other guys in Watts and Hasty, who was active last week but just played 1 snap in special teams, to basically be the ones competing for most of the work. So Shane Watts is my favorite high-risk play, probably on this entire slate, to be completely honest with you. Sticking with the New England Patriots, when we look at the wide receivers here, Efton Chisholm obviously made a lot of headlines last week, scoring a lot of points on that fantasy slate. He's also turned heads pretty much all week in joint practices with the Vikings, getting a lot of work in with all of the Patriots quarterbacks. Slot receiver for them here seems to have a leg up on actually making the roster here to begin the season, but he is competing with a couple of other guys that have some underlying metrics here that make them valuable in tournaments. Kyle Williams, the 2nd-round draft pick, who's actually going to make the roster, he had 4 targets last week and 91 air yards in the Patriots game against the Washington Commanders. So looking for a little bit of regression there, and I believe we have a quote from Josh Dobbs, who actually said that he owes Kyle Williams a touchdown because he reviewed the film and saw that he missed him wide open. So if Dobbs is going to be feeding Williams the ball, decent play in high-risk contests. It's not going to be carrying a ton of ownership. And then the other player, who is a 2nd-year player on this offense that has had a lot of buzz this week in the joint practices, Javon Baker with the Patriots as well. Probably a good high-risk play there. But if I'm looking for another low-risk receiver to get into my lineups today, I think Efton Chisholm is going to be one of my favorites to get in there as well. Let's go to Well, let me see if there are any questions before I decide to talk about something that I want to talk about. So, that is not the right window. Appreciate your patience with me on this, guys. LVRBs, 6 running backs for the Raiders. Yep. Posting the plug. The plug is posted for the early slate. The link is in the chat above. I don't know if you saw that. I'll jump it again. I'll drop it again in here for you. And then our plug for the main slate is going to come out later this afternoon. Research team is working on that now. And I'll talk about that at the end of the video for a few minutes as you have some questions. Discord link, there should be a... All right, let me get that for you. Appreciate you being here as always. Everybody looking to find out what ownership is on these slates. A little bit of a look at what I'm thinking about for the main slate. If you guys have some questions, start thinking about those because I do want to transition to that. I'll probably hang to between like 12:15 and 12:30 just because we're talking about a lot of stuff today and there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving information, and obviously that's why we had that little snafu with McKee a little earlier that I'm still looking for a little bit of confirmation on. So, okay. Tight end, I think Lucas on our research staff wanted me to point out that for Detroit at tight end on the early slate, probably just Zylstra and Horton are the most attractive options today. We put Zylstra as a low-risk play. I'd caution, though, that we have a couple of spring football legends here. Steven Stylianos from the San Antonio Brahmas, Gunnar Oaks from the Michigan Panthers that might mix in. Oaks had a little bit more passing game work in the UFL this spring than Stylianos, so he might be a threat for some work there at a relatively weak position today. Just make sure I haven't gotten anything dropped in. The Browns gave us their inactive players. I don't think there's any surprises today, but they did post their inactives on their website today. So there's the inactives for the Cleveland Browns that came through. DeAndre Carter, Jerry Jeudy, David Bell at wide receiver inactive. Big news if you were interested in Harold Fannin Jr., the Bowling Green product, who set the record last year for receiving for a tight end. He's inactive today. David Njoku inactive with the starters. Dylan Sampson, Lamarian James, and Jerome Ford inactive at running back for Cleveland. Why don't I put this on the screen so we can actually talk about this, huh? We listed Watson, Pickett, Sanders, Flacco. There's no surprises there. So, all right. When we look at the depth chart for the Browns at receiver, and let's look at running backs. We have 3 inactive running backs listed here. Ford's out, Dylan Sampson's out, and Lamarian James isn't even listed on the roster, but that means these 4 guys here listed at the back of the depth chart, Strong, Amari Marshall, Toa Taua, and Travion Williams are all going to be active today. This actually is a good opportunity, I think, for me to look at some of the research tools that we have available on our website for subscribers. So let's check out what Cleveland did, because we got the same staff with Stefanski this year as last year, right? In week 1 at the running back position. Now we see last year in week 1, 4 guys play. Okay, Strong and Kelly led in snaps. So it's pretty even split here, and Jerome Ford cleaned up late. We look at week number 2. Strong moved to the bottom here. Okay, led the week before, then got the least amount of work. Dante Foreman, a veteran who wasn't active the first week, actually got the most work. Aiden Robbins on here, the second most work. Let's just double check something. Aiden Robbins had the 3rd most work the week before. Now let's look at this year. I think everybody's focusing on Amani Marshall. That's the player that has some stat lines out there with like underdog, pick 6, prize picks. But I actually think the player we might want, we were just told he's active, right? Pierre Strong Jr. Because he fits the trend from last season, where we had a running back that didn't play in the first game, play in the second game, and then get a ton of work. So that's just kind of an inference based off of Stefanski's coaching tendencies here. I do think Pierre Strong might be a decent high-risk play, especially now that we know there's a little bit less competition for touches today in that backfield. And the other guys that are going to be playing, Marshall, Tawa, and Williams, Browns already got a look at them last week, so they still really do need to get a look at Pierre Strong. Remember, they're still trying to collect information and make some decisions about who to play this season. At receiver, looks like I didn't see Cedric Tillman's name on the inactive list. I'm just double checking that. I'd be skeptical if you got out there, but I guess we have him. We have Jamari Thrash, Deontay Johnson, Caden Davis. 4, 5, 6. They got 8. They have 7 guys, it looks like, still active. And the one that is going to be most popular is probably Gage Larvadain. When we look at the main slate here for the Browns, that's the player that basically had the most buzz in a lot of the articles that we read this week. Cade McDonald as well. So Gage Larvadain, Cade McDonald, they're the ones we were honed in on. Caden Davis had the 2 touchdowns last week, so he might actually get a little bit more ownership just by virtue of that alone. But if we look at how Cleveland used their players last week, Caden Davis actually played behind McDonald and Larvadain. And sticking with how Cleveland tends to use their players, again, wide receiver snaps, here's who played the most last week. Let's go to last year. These are the guys that played the most in week 1, Michael Woods, Jamari Thrash. We go to week number 2. Michael Woods, Jamari Thrash were there in the top 3 again the following week. So that's a pretty good indicator that if we look at who led the Browns in snaps at receiver last week, McDonald, Larvadain, Johnson, these guys probably going to do that again here. The top of the video, I mentioned the Eagles. I want to go back to this since I'm on the page now. Look at this. 2/3 plus 3/4 of snaps for Wilson and Cooper. Why did that pop off the page to us? Obviously, other than it's a lot of snaps, right? That's interesting. We look at week 1 last year. Johnny Wilson, John Ross, Britton Covey, Joseph Ngata led Philadelphia in snaps. We go to week 2. We see the same group of receivers near the top of the board there for playing time. I think Johnny Wilson was injured, so that's why he dropped off. So we're expecting pretty consistent playing time trends for those Eagles receivers. This is our snap counts and opportunity data. We also track targets, air yards, and opportunities, just raw touches in general for all skill players. This is completely available and updated every week after preseason by like Monday, Tuesday to look back at what teams did. It's definitely something that our core offering, our core subscribers of preseason products love to use as well, and we make sure we keep that updated for you guys. So if you haven't checked this out already, would love to see you guys check that out in the future. All right, what else do we want to talk about on the early slate? I know we got an hour until that locks, but I still haven't covered the main slate at all, and I want to answer any questions you guys have about tonight's main slate. I'm going to be honest with you, we have a lot more information about the early slate right now because it's happening in an hour, and we're still working on some of our stuff for the main slate, but we'll give you what we have so far. Okay, getting back to the commentary. Got a couple of bots that we need to get rid of. That's always exciting. Both Washingtons looked good for Miami. Josh, appreciate you hanging out for the show here, bud. I do have a preference. My preference is going to be Taj. I want to show you why. Taj is the one that we ranked. We didn't really rank Malik. And the reason for that is Malik basically got all of his opportunities with the starters. So he got 4 targets, and I believe those 4 targets were all from Tua Tagovailoa, and then he didn't really play after that. So that suggests to me that he's locked in as potentially the number 3 receiver behind Hill and Waddle, and may not act, and maybe too valuable for a role in this game if they're resting their starters, which is what they told us they would be doing this week. We're getting a half of Zach Wilson and a half of Quinn Ewers, and we're not expecting Malik Washington to be part of that here. Looking at our stack options, we've got Taj Washington probably playing with Zach Wilson. Eskridge was the one that got more headlines in the reports that we read this week. Ezra Konma, who's been with Miami previously for a couple of preseasons, actually could potentially play with both quarterbacks. So those are some other Miami wide receivers that we're interested in other than the Washingtons. But if we're picking one Washington named receiver from the Miami Dolphins today, Taj Washington is the one that we like here at Occupy. Appreciate the question, and thank you for hanging out this afternoon. All right. Is Gabriel a play again after the tweet from the Cleveland Reporter? I do think that it doesn't feel great. The playing time upside doesn't feel strong here. When his stat line opened, it was like 101. It got down to 90 last I looked before the show. I'm not sure where it is now. Let's go take a look and check that out and see if we can figure that out for you guys. Over on Underdog, which these lines are pretty good proxies for where ownership is going to be in these contests. That's why I like to look at this information. Dylan Gabriel, 105.5. So it's gone back up. So people seem to be into Gabriel again today. I would say, yeah, he's probably back as a low risk play. I'll make that edit and say you can probably include him now. And obviously, I got to go in there and do something about Tanner McKee if that was incorrect. So I'll fix that. Okay, so Tanner McKee locked in number 2 job. That got reported like right as I started the show. So that's why I had a little bit of a hiccup there. So I'll go in there. We'll make an update live together. You guys get to see the secret sauce here about basically how that works. Why Tanner McKee is out. Since we know not everybody is watching the show. He might be the most popular quarterback now. Talking about Dylan Gabriel, of course, at that number. When we look at the lines here that were posted, McKee basically coming off the board, that puts Gabriel at the top. He's 105.5. Live show, a little bit of interruptions, but kind of look at these when I sit down to prep. We'll talk about the main slate in a bit here. This is basically the early slate. As my last pass of this information was about 11:15 this morning. So if some of these lines are stale, I do apologize. But this just gives you a sense for maybe the rankings on this slate. And now with Gabriel at 105 yards, he's clearly the number 1 play, at least probably by ownership this afternoon. But you saw our research team ranked Malik Willis, and that's because he's projected to play about a half, and he has that rushing upside. And obviously we saw that with the Tennessee Titans in many preseason games, over the last couple of years. Probably pretty fairly evenly spread out ownership at this point, unless everyone just flocks to Gabriel, expecting him to play as much as Shadur Sanders last week. And then obviously you see some of the running back stats here, the wide receiver stats here. So again, Underdog stats, pick 6 stats, prize picks stat lines, pretty good proxies for ownership on these slates, because that's basically they're projecting based off of quote-unquote sharp projections all of the sites in this industry are putting out for preseason games. Shout out to us. So there's already a lot of consensus on what the best plays are going to be anyway, but this gives us a sense for what some of the high-risk plays are going to be. Some of the lower-ranked guys, some of the guys that aren't ranked at all with stat lines, right? So just in general, that's like a little bit of strategy that we like to employ on these slates. If we're good with early slate questions, guys, I think I'll transition into the main slate, because obviously that's a bigger prize pool and a lot more action going on here. I'm not working in my kid's bedroom. I'm working in my own bedroom because I had to turn my office into a bedroom for my 2 kids. So that's where we're at there. Thanks for being here, Brandon. A lot easier to be a tough guy in the comments than to come on the screen and do the show. That's for sure. When we look at tonight's main slate, we have Stetson Bennett with the Rams and Joe Milton with the Cowboys that are probably going to play a ton of snaps once again. Will Greer will back up Joe Milton. We've seen Joe Milton get a ton of work here. Last week, played 89% of the snaps. Probably going to do that again here this week. Big arm, high ceiling. I do think most people are going to play Milton or Stetson Bennett today on this evening slate. The other quarterback that, looking at some of our research that is in progress, that might have a decent amount of playing time upside, other side of that Dallas game, Cooper Rush, looks like he might get a decent amount of work. He only played 19% of snaps last week, though, and Devin Leary played 81%. Last year, the Ravens had 4 quarterbacks. They only have 3 this year. They played 3 in week 2. Starter played half the game, and the other 2 split the rest of the game. So even though we have one less quarterback here with Lamar Jackson not playing, we're expecting a similar outcome here. Cooper Rush playing a half of the game. Probably put him at least close to that same tier as Milton and Stetson Bennett as the best plays at the position. There are 6, speaking of Baltimore, there are 6 running backs on this team. Neither of Derrick Henry or Justice Hill are going to play today. D'Ernest Johnson had 53% of snaps played last week. Rasheen Ali and Keaton Mitchell each played about a quarter, 23-24% of snaps. Ali is the one that has the highest stat projection right now. I don't know how strong of a play that's going to be if he's not going to have the most playing time compared to Johnson. And then they also signed Myles Gaskin fairly recently, and he's looked good in his limited work. Signed him, I think it was like on Tuesday, the 12th, whatever day that was. So he could get a little bit of work as well. Patrick Ricard is more of a fullback, so he doesn't really count for running backs. Marcus Major waived with an injury. Okay. And yes, Harbaugh does play to win in the preseason, but also has not had as much success recently. Okay. Getting rid of He does, but Harbaugh also has lost, I think, 4 preseason games in the last 2 years, so that trend is not entirely the same as it was before. Okay. All right. We look at the Rams. We should expect Jarquez Hunter to still continue to get a ton of work this week. He's projected to have the 2nd most rushing yards. Looking at some of the stat lines that are available, Blake Corum also had a big game last week, so those are the 2 guys in the Rams backfield. Look for Dallas to continue to lean on Maffa here as well. When we look at the usage for receivers for the Rams, looking at players to pair with Stetson Bennett, Kanata Mumfield is going to be the popular one again here, and that's because when we look at last week, played 42 snaps, 63% of the snaps. Drake Stoops, Britton Covey, right there. Basically just 6 guys played a ton for the Rams last week. And Sean McVay pretty famously just leans on these scrub players that aren't going to have meaningful roles in preseason at quarterback, at receiver, every single week. This is now looking at last year's week 1. You see 3 guys, 50% plus of snaps, just 6 total played. And we basically had the exact same thing happen the following week. So we're expecting Mumfield, we're expecting Covey and Drake Stoops to be the best plays from the Rams here this afternoon. We look at Baltimore. Devontae Walker played 73% of snaps. That might be an interesting opportunity today. LaJohntay Wester and Dayton Wade were the other guys that played a ton. When we look at Baltimore usage from last year, Wade, Washington, Walker led in week 1. Week 2, Wade's up here. So there's not as much consistency here. There are more guys that played in week 2 with Baltimore, but a pretty good bet to see these Baltimore receivers that played a ton last week, Walker, Wade, and Wester, play a ton again this week here. I think pretty much every single time the Chargers are on a preseason slate, people jam in KLS, Keandre Lambert-Smith, played 50% of the snaps last week. Played 37% of the snaps the week before. Campbell, number 2 in week 1, number 1 in the Hall of Fame game. Those 2 guys probably good high-risk plays here. Also, we have couple of starting wide receivers that people are interested in today on the 5-game slate tonight. I think McConkey has a decent stat line, so you might see him get at least a few percentage points of ownership. Starter/rookie, Ekbuka might see a couple percentage points of ownership as well. And then when we look at the tight end position, Gadsden is probably going to be one of the more popular plays this evening. His teammate, Will Dissly, should also see a little bit of ownership. He probably plays earlier in the game. And then we're going to see Greg Dulcich with the Giants probably get a little bit of ownership as well, just because these are some of the guys that have some publicly available lines available, and that's usually a good indication that they're going to be popular plays on the slate. Okay. All right. If there are no questions about this main slate, I do think I'm going to jump back into the document and get back to work on the main slate, because we're probably going to have basically this core of plays you see on the screen here probably still going to remain fairly popular. Bennett, his #1 receiver in terms of snaps played last week. Gadsden at tight end, these two running backs. And then I guess I had a couple questions in here about defenses. I do look at betting markets to come up with defense plays. The Broncos, I think, are the biggest favorites tonight. They were at 1.7-point favorites. I think that has come down a little bit. So they should probably be a good bet to be popular, but probably be in a better situation to succeed here against the Arizona Cardinals. And then looking at the slate that's about to lock in about 45 minutes. The Colts are the biggest favored by 6 points here against Green Bay. And then we also have, before the McKee news, Philadelphia was favored pretty heavily. I believe there were a couple of 4.5-point favorites on that slate. So we were looking at Las Vegas and Philadelphia as other options. Basically derive the team totals from there. Look at the team totals that are projected to be the lowest, or the teams that are projected to score the fewest amount of points. And that's where you get some high-risk defense plays as well. So that's kind of how we derive our defense plays here. All right, guys, I appreciate you hanging out. As always, please make sure, like the video, subscribe to the channel. We'll be back tomorrow with a pre-recorded look at the 2-gamer on Sunday afternoon. We'll be back with a video about Monday Night Football as well. And, of course, we have Best Ball Week coming up next week as well, where Chuck and I will be talking about some of the players that we're actually going to be watching on Sundays real soon. Thanks for